Stop right there. What are you doing here? I said don't move. Explain yourself.
I'm just sitting here. What's the issue?
We got to report a suspicious behavior.
Suspicious? I'm in a wheelchair on a public beach.
ID. Now, don't argue with me.
Tell me what I've done wrong before
I'm not
demanding
debating. Show your ID.
Pelican Shore Beach, coastal Georgia. A Wednesday afternoon in late July. The kind of afternoon where the air sits heavy and the water is the only thing moving with any purpose. Families packed up around noon when the heat peaked. By 2 o'clock, the crowd had thinned to a handful of people. A man with a fishing line at the far end of the pier, 2 teenagers on boogie boards in the shallows, a couple under an umbrella near the dunes, and 1 woman in a folding chair at the waterline, shoes off, a glass of iced tea sweating in the cup holder beside her. Watching the horizon do nothing in particular. She had been there for 40 minutes. She had not spoken to anyone. She had not moved from the chair except to adjust the angle slightly away from the sun. She had her phone face down on the armrest and had not picked it up once since she sat down, which was itself a kind of discipline. The phone had been her entire life for the past 6 weeks, and she was trying to remember what it felt like to exist without it. Her name was Laura Jennings, 46 years old, Supervisory Special Agent, FBI, Southeastern Field Division. She'd spent the prior 6 weeks running a joint federal operation that had required 70-hour weeks, 2 interstate transfers, 3 separate cover identities for members of her team, and a final 48-hour push that had ended at 4 a.m. on a Monday. She'd driven to the coast on Tuesday night. She'd checked into a motel 4 blocks from the beach. She'd slept for 11 hours. And on Wednesday afternoon, she'd carried a folding chair and a glass of iced tea down to the waterline, because the only thing her body and mind had agreed on in recent memory was that they needed to be somewhere quiet and horizontal for a few hours. She was unarmed, off-duty, not surveilling anyone, not running anything, not connected to any operation. Just a woman in a beach chair watching the Atlantic Ocean. Someone didn't like that. The 911 call came in at 2:23 p.m. The caller identified themselves as a concerned beachgoer, the report. A black woman sitting alone near the waterline, acting suspiciously, not talking to anyone, just watching. The dispatcher asked what the suspicious behavior was. The caller said she'd been there a long time, and it didn't seem right. Officer Brent Calloway arrived at 2:31 p.m. He was 31. Made 6 years on the Pelican Shore PD. 2 prior complaints in his file. 1 for aggressive handling of a traffic stop, 1 filed by a black woman who said he'd told her to act like she belonged during a noise ordinance call. Both complaints had been closed by the same watch commander. Neither had resulted in documented retraining or formal review. He came down the beach path with his hand near his belt and his expression already set. The way you set an expression when you've already decided what you're walking into before you get there. Laura heard his footsteps in the sand, turned her head, registered the uniform, turned back to the water. She knew, in the way people who have spent careers in law enforcement know, exactly what was about to happen. She picked up her iced tea, took a drink, set it back down. She was going to need the patience. Calloway stopped 3 feet from her chair. "You been here long?" "About 40 minutes. Somebody called it in." "Called what in?" "Said someone was sitting out here acting suspicious." Laura looked at her chair, her iced tea, the water. "I'm sitting in a beach chair, alone. That's allowed. People don't usually sit out here alone this long." "Some people do." She looked up at him, shielded her eyes from the sun. "I'm one of them today. I'm going to need to see some ID." "What am I suspected of?" "I just told you. Someone called and reported a woman sitting at a public beach. That's not a crime. What am I suspected of doing?" Calloway shifted his weight. The small adjustment of a man recalibrating because the conversation isn't following the script he arrived with. "It's a routine ID check. Routine ID checks require reasonable suspicion. Sitting at a beach isn't reasonable suspicion." "Ma'am, I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm asking a procedural question. What is the legal basis for the ID request?" His jaw tightened. "Your attitude is the legal basis right now." Laura looked at him for a long moment. The look of a woman who has heard that sentence before, in different rooms, from different people, and has long since developed a specific internal response to it that doesn't show on her face. "That's not a legal basis. That's an opinion. Stand up." "Why?" "Because I asked you to." "That's also not a legal basis." Calloway stepped closer. I'm not going to stand here and debate procedure with you on a public beach. Stand up, or this becomes a different kind of conversation. The couple under the umbrella 40 yards away had lowered their umbrella slightly, not all the way, just enough. The two teenagers in the shallows had drifted closer to shore. The man on the pier was watching. Laura set her iced tea down, slowly, deliberately. She stood up, 5'7", steady, hands visible. She turned to face him. I'm standing. I'd still like to know the legal basis for this stop. Suspicious presence, sitting at a beach, acting in a way that concerned members of the public, sitting quietly, looking at the water. Some people found it unusual. Some people find a lot of things unusual that aren't illegal. She held eye contact. Not aggressive, steady. The specific steadiness of a person who has managed interrogation rooms and surveillance operations and congressional testimony and has a very clear sense of what composure looks like under pressure. I'd like your badge number. You'll get it when I'm done. I'd like it now. Calloway's hand moved to his radio. He called it in. Described the situation as a non-compliant subject on the beach, female, refusing ID. The description was not consistent with what the body cam was recording, which showed a woman standing still with her hands visible who had asked 2 procedural questions. That inconsistency would later be noted in the review board's findings in bold. Last time, he said. ID. I'll show you identification, Laura said. I want to be clear that I'm doing so voluntarily and that I believe this stop is without legal basis. She reached toward her bag. My credentials are in the front pocket. I'm reaching for them now. If this already feels wrong to you, stay with it. Because what happens next is the part that changes everything. Her hand was in the bag for 3 seconds. That was enough. Calloway's hand came down on her wrist before she'd touched anything. Not a grab, a clamp. The specific kind of contact that communicates ownership rather than caution. I said don't reach. I told you I was reaching. Out of the bag. Hands up. You're grabbing my wrist. Hands up. Laura brought her hand out of the bag empty. Both hands visible. His grip was still on her wrist. She didn't pull back. She didn't react. She stood in the exact posture the situation required. Visible, still, compliant. And she said, quietly and clearly, you need to remove your hand from my wrist. You need to stop reaching into bags without permission. I told you I was reaching. I announced it. It's on whatever's recording this interaction right now. He released her wrist, not because she'd asked, because the couple under the umbrella was on their feet now, and the teenagers had come all the way out of the water, and the man on the pier had his phone up, and a woman who'd been walking along the shoreline path had stopped and was watching with her hand over her mouth. Sit back down, Calloway said. You told me to stand up. Now, I'm telling you to sit. I'd prefer to stand. That wasn't a preference. Sit down. I'm standing with my hands visible in a public space. I haven't done anything that justifies any of this interaction. I'd like to call my supervisor. You can call whoever you want after I'm done. I'd like to do it now. That's not how this works. And then he said it. The line that wasn't like a good boy. It was different, its own specific flavor of contempt, the kind that gets dressed up as procedure but means something much simpler. He said, stop performing and just do what you're told. You're not in charge here. The woman on the path made a sound, involuntary, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. The teenagers looked at each other. The couple under the umbrella, the man specifically, said something to his partner and started walking toward the scene with his phone extended. Laura looked at Calloway. She had been in federal service for 20 years. She had held people's futures in her hands in interrogation rooms. She had testified under oath about operations that shaped prosecutions in multiple states. She had navigated situations with far more physical danger than a beach in coastal Georgia on a Wednesday afternoon. And she was standing here. I'm going to say something, she said, and I want you to listen carefully. I am a federal agent. My credentials are in that bag. I've identified myself twice. I would like you to look at what's in the bag before this continues. You've told me you're federal. People tell me all kinds of things. Then verify it, right now. Look in the bag. I look in the bag on my timeline, not yours. Your timeline has already produced a wrist grab. Oh, a command to sit, followed immediately by a command to stand, and a direction to stop performing that I'd encourage you to think carefully about having said on camera. She kept her voice exactly level. Look in the bag. He grabbed her arm, both hands this time, turned her toward the water. "You're being detained." "On what charge?" "Obstruction." "I haven't obstructed anything." "You've obstructed every reasonable request I've made since I got here. Name one reasonable request." He didn't answer. He walked her forward, not toward the parking area, toward the waterline, the specific illogic of a man in motion who hasn't decided where the motion ends. The crowd closed in without moving closer, the way crowds close in when the radius of attention contracts. The man with his phone extended was 15 feet away. His phone was level. His hand was steady. He was not the only one. At the waterline, Calloway reached for his cuffs. The woman on the path said, "You can't do that." Calloway didn't look at her. The cuffs went on at 2:47 p.m. Laura standing at the waterline of a public beach in coastal Georgia, hands behind her back, shoes still in the sand where she'd left them by the folding chair, iced tea still in the cup holder, phone still face down on the armrest. She said nothing when the cuffs clicked. She looked at the water. She took one slow breath. She was building the case. She'd been building it since 2:31 p.m., and she wasn't going to stop now. If this is making your blood rise, comment accountability. Because the next few minutes dismantled everything he thought he had. Backup arrived at 2:53 p.m. Officer Colin Hayes, 3 years on the force, he pulled up to the beach access path and came down with the specific energy of someone who'd been given a description that didn't match what he was looking at. He'd been told, non-compliant subject, beach, possible trespassing. What he saw, a woman in cuffs at the waterline, a crowd of 8 people recording, and a folding chair with an iced tea in the cup holder 20 feet away. Hayes looked at Calloway. "What are we working with?" "Obstruction, refused ID, refused to comply with lawful orders." Hayes looked at the crowd, at Laura, at the bag still sitting by the chair. "Has she been searched?" "Getting there." "Anything on her?" "Haven't checked yet." Hayes walked to the bag. He wasn't going to touch it, standard, but he looked at it. Through the open front pocket he could see the edge of something, a wallet-style holder. He could see the corner of a seal. He looked at it for a second, then at Laura, then at Calloway. "What's in the front pocket?" he asked Laura. "My credentials," she said. "I've been trying to show them since 2:31. Hayes crouched, looked more closely without touching. The seal was visible now. He'd seen that seal before, in joint training sessions, in interagency briefings, in the laminated poster on the wall of the district office that showed which federal IDs to recognize on site. He stood up. "Calloway!" "What?" "Come look at this." Calloway walked over, looked at the bag, the corner of the credential holder, the edge of the seal. His face did something that 8 separate recordings captured from 8 separate angles. Not a dramatic collapse, something quieter and more permanent. The specific expression of a man who has understood something that cannot be ununderstood. He picked up the bag, opened the front pocket, took out the credential holder, opened it. FBI, Supervisory Special Agent, Laura A. Jennings, Southeastern Field Division. The photo was unmistakable. The seal was real, embossed, weighted, the kind that 20 years in law enforcement teaches you to recognize in under 3 seconds. The beach was completely quiet except for the water. "You want to take those off me now?" Laura said. Not a question. The tone of a woman who has been patient for 22 minutes and is allocating the last of it precisely. Hayes was already reaching for the key. The cuffs came off at 2:56 p.m. Laura brought her hands forward. She picked up her bag. She took out her credentials and clipped them to her jacket. And then she turned around and faced the beach. The crowd, the phones, the folding chair, Calloway standing at the waterline with the credential holder still in his hand. She held her hand out for it. He gave it back. She looked at him. Steady. Level. The same expression she'd had since 2:31. Not angry, not vindicated, just present. "I'm going to need your badge number," she said. "Both of you." Hayes gave his immediately. Calloway stood there for 2 seconds. Then he gave his. She put both numbers in her phone. She picked up her shoes from the sand. She picked up her folding chair. She walked to the cup holder near where she'd been sitting and picked up her iced tea. She sat back down. She was not done at the beach. She had come here to decompress, and she was going to decompress. She looked back at the water. The crowd didn't leave immediately. They stood in the sand and watched a woman in a beach chair with a federal credential clipped to her jacket look at the Atlantic Ocean, while 2 officers stood behind her and didn't say a word. The call to the FBI's Southeastern Field Office went out at 3:04 p.m. Not from Laura, she was still sitting at the waterline. From Hayes, who had walked back to the beach access path and made the call himself, because he'd understood within 90 seconds of seeing those credentials that the correct move was to get ahead of what was coming, rather than wait for it to arrive. It arrived anyway. The field office duty supervisor reached Pelican Shore PD's watch commander at 3:11 p.m. That call lasted 7 minutes. By the end of it, thought the watch commander had a very clear picture of what the next several days were going to look like, and the picture was not good. He called the division chief at 3:22 p.m. That call lasted 11 minutes. Calloway's administrative leave paperwork was processed at 4:45 p.m. The body cam footage was reviewed by the department's Internal Affairs Division beginning at 6 p.m. the same evening, which was unusually fast, and reflected how quickly the watch commander had assessed the situation. What the review found in the first 45 minutes was enough to warrant an emergency session of the review board the following morning. The footage showed a woman seated calmly in a public space, approached without stated cause, asked for her ID without legal basis, subjected to a wrist grab during a voluntary bag search, cuffed without any documented probable cause, and held at the waterline while her credentials, visible, accessible, and repeatedly referenced, sat untouched in an open bag 20 feet away for 25 minutes. The footage also showed Calloway's line, "Stop performing and just do what you're told. You're not in charge here." The review board spent 11 minutes on that line in their session, specifically on the word performing, what it communicated about how Calloway perceived Laura's composure, and what that perception revealed about the framework he'd brought to the stop before he'd exchanged a single word with her. The board's written analysis of that one word ran to 2 paragraphs. His prior complaint history added context. The 2021 aggressive handling complaint. The complaint from the black woman who said he'd told her to act like she belonged. Both closed by the same watch commander. The review board pulled the watch commander's complaint closure records for the prior 4 years and found a pattern. Not the same pattern in every case, but a directional consistency that the board described as insufficiently scrutinized at the supervisory level. That language, insufficiently scrutinized at the supervisory level, meant the watch commander was in the report, by name. The federal civil rights liaison arrived from Atlanta on day 2. She reviewed the footage, the complaint history, the prior closures, and the 911 call transcript. She interviewed Laura on day 3. The interview lasted 2 hours. Laura was precise, specific, and accurate to every timestamp the footage confirmed. She described each request she'd made and each response she'd received. She described the wrist grab, the cuff moment, the credential holder sitting visible in the open bag while she stood in cuffs at the waterline. She was asked how she had stayed that calm. She thought about it for a moment. "I knew what was on camera," she said, "and I knew that the calmer I stayed, the clearer the record would be. Every time I didn't react the way he was trying to make me react, the footage got cleaner." She paused. "And I've spent 20 years learning that the room you're sitting in doesn't determine who has authority. Documentation does." The civil rights liaison made a note, looked at her. "You were still cuffed on a public beach for 25 minutes. "I know," Laura said. "Documentation doesn't stop things from happening. It determines what happens after." Calloway's termination was finalized on day 16. The review board's recommendation had been unanimous. The division chief approved it on day 14. The union filed a grievance on day 17. The grievance review panel watched the footage. They watched Calloway's prior complaint history. They watched the timestamp showing 25 minutes between the bag being set down and the credential being examined. The grievance was denied on day 29. His law enforcement certification was referred to the Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council on day 18. The council reviewed the case on day 31. Certification revoked on day 38. Hayes received a formal reprimand for failure to ensure ID verification prior to physical detention. His attorney argued that he had been the one to identify the credentials and initiate the correction. The review board acknowledged that, and still issued the reprimand on the basis that he had arrived at the scene, assessed the situation, and did not immediately require verification before detention continued. The reprimand was upheld. The caller who had reported a suspicious black woman sitting at the beach was identified through the 911 system. The Pelican Shore City Attorney's Office reviewed the call against the footage and filed a harassment complaint on day 22. The caller was a 54-year-old woman who had been at the beach with her husband. She gave a statement saying she had been genuinely concerned. And the city attorney's office noted that sitting alone at a public beach while black did not constitute the threshold for genuine concern that warranted a police response, and that the call had initiated a chain of events resulting in the unlawful detention and physical handling of a federal officer. The couple under the umbrella, the ones who'd gotten to their feet and walked toward the scene, gave voluntary witness statements on day 4. Their footage was submitted as Exhibit B. They had captured the wrist grab, the cuffing, and the credential holder, visible in the open bag from an angle that the body cam hadn't fully covered. Their footage ran on 2 local news stations before the week was out. The civil lawsuit was filed 38 days after the stop. It named Callaway personally. It named the Pelican Shore PD. It named the city. Oh, and it named the watch commander whose signature appeared on both prior complaint closures and whose management of those closures had created, the filing argued, the institutional environment that produced this stop. The lawsuit cited 5 violations. 3 carried personal liability. 1 addressed the systemic complaint closure pattern. The 5th was a federal civil rights count that the city's legal team spent 3 weeks trying to separate from the municipal liability. They couldn't. The settlement was reached at day 77, $2.8 million. Mandatory independent review of all complaint closures from the prior 3 years. External oversight of Pelican Shore PD's internal affairs process for 5 years. Mandatory federal identification training for all officers. A reopening of both prior Callaway complaints under independent review. And a condition that Laura's attorneys had included in the first draft and kept in every subsequent one, a formal departmental acknowledgement that the stop on July 23rd had been conducted without legal basis from the initial approach. 1 sentence, formal, signed, public record. The watch commander retired before the settlement was finalized. His retirement was processed as voluntary. The federal review didn't stop with his retirement. It noted his departure and continued. Laura went back to the beach on a Thursday, 6 weeks after the stop. Different day, same shore. She parked in the same lot, carried the same folding chair down the same beach path, sat at the waterline. No iced tea this time, just water. She'd forgotten to bring the tea. She sat for 2 hours. The water was the same. Heavy air, slow waves, the horizon doing nothing in particular. She'd been back at work for 4 of those 6 weeks, running a new operation that had nothing to do with coastal Georgia and everything to do with the next 11 weeks of 70-hour days. She'd made time for this Thursday, blocked it on the calendar, which she almost never did for personal things. Her assistant had asked what to put in the block. Laura had said, beach. Her assistant hadn't asked anything else. She sat in the chair and looked at the water and thought about the things she'd said in the interview on day 3. That documentation doesn't stop things from happening. It determines what happens after. She'd said it because it was true. She'd believed it for 20 years. She believed it now. And she sat with the part of it that was harder to say out loud. The part that was true at the same time and in the same direction and didn't cancel the first part out, but lived alongside it uncomfortably. Documentation works when you have something to document with. A credential, a body cam, 8 phones in a crowd, a couple under an umbrella who got to their feet and walked over. A backup officer who crouched down and looked at the seal in the open bag and understood what he was looking at. She had all of those things on a Wednesday in July. She'd been in federal service for 20 years, and she had all of those things, and she was still in cuffs for 25 minutes at the waterline. What she didn't have a clean answer for, sitting in the chair on the Thursday 6 weeks later, water in hand, our shoes off, was the version of that Wednesday that happened to a woman who wasn't a federal agent, who sat in a beach chair on a public beach with an iced tea and watched the water and had no credential in her bag and no 20 years of documentation to deploy and no field office to call and no civil rights liaison on a plane from Atlanta. That woman exists. She goes to this beach. She was probably here last Wednesday and the Wednesday before. The 911 caller would call on her too. And the record of what happened next would depend entirely on what phones happened to be nearby and whether the couple under the umbrella happened to get up. Laura picked up her water, took a drink, set it back down in the cup holder. She looked at the horizon. The waves kept moving. If stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, turn on notifications. Thus, because the ones that don't go viral are the ones that need to be told the most.